Maybe it's because it was the holidays and everyone was doing other things. No time for hacking.
But wow, it's just all in there. If you have someone's Postman workspace with API keys, you probably have the keys to the castles.
The number one language was Go.
Imagine running a server on Windows today. That would seem funny, wouldn't it?
How many LLMs can you stick in your service and how quickly can you expose them? Hey all, welcome back to the API and Anchor. It's 2025 and of course the world does not stop when it comes to the toings and froings of APIs. We're here in our virtual pub to sit down and have a little drink and a little chat about some of the things that have been taking place over the festive season in the world of APIs. I'm here with Josh. Josh, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Martin. Good to see you again. Hope you're 2025. 25 years into 2000. Wow, nuts.
That's a whole quarter.
Of a century, not a millennium, but yeah, of a century, yeah.
So we've pulled together a few things that we're going to talk about today. Obviously, with the holidays, there wasn't a huge amount of stuff going on, but there was something that did pop up around about the 23rd of December that actually, until we discovered it yesterday, I don't think either of us had actually heard about, seen, or even come across, and that was an article that had come out from a research company called Cloudflare, who had published a report on December 23rd of 2024 about how they had discovered a bunch of Postman workspaces that were actually out there available to the public and filled with lots of compromising data for around 30,000 APIs, including some major ones from very large companies that were effectively exposing not only secrets but session tokens and various other bits of documentation and endpoints that could have had some pretty significant impact if people had actually discovered them. But it doesn't look like anybody really did. Maybe it's because it was the holidays and everyone was doing other things. No time for hacking.
If that was a wonderful gift. That this came out on the 24th of December to Postman, right? It kind of was buried really in the holidays. I can't believe we didn't hear about this, but it's interesting. Yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah, I even looked around just to see what kind of news coverage it got, and even just a Google News search only came up with 3 or 4 articles that had come out around about the same time, and none of those even seemed to be from kind of major press outlets. So it really was quite beneficial, the timing of it, but maybe that was also something that had been discussed as well. But it seems that the main cause of the problem here was people inadvertently setting their workspaces to public, and inside of said workspaces not really following any kind of security practices for various things like you would be expected to do, or if you're working at large companies, like the security training that you regularly go through tells you to do. And because of that, there was a whole load of stuff there that was seemingly thought to be private that actually wasn't at all. Now, couldn't really find any information about how these workspaces were being set to public, but they were inadvertently set to public. So there was something there within the UI, whether it be the web-based UI or the actual software-based UI, it doesn't say either, but there was something there that was proving easy enough for people to have gone through and done this, 30,000 times at least.
Yeah, it really reminds me of the time I was at Microsoft, or maybe even a bit before, where they built so much software and security, like IIS, or Internet Information Services, which is like the web server that came on Windows back in the day. Imagine running a server on Windows today. That would seem funny, wouldn't it? And how they just designed it for sort of ease of experience and ease of getting started, and hadn't put in sort of secured by default practices. So, when you created a new server, everything was open, everything was unlocked. And yeah, it was easy to get started, but it wasn't secure. And then the whole culture at Microsoft really pivoted with this notion of being secure by default. Reading between the lines, it seems like Postman might need to make a similar change to their product and really make it very clear, because it's pretty dangerous, right? What's happening here in terms of what's being leaked with API keys, and these could be internal APIs that people, that aren't necessarily discussed on the internet or have documentation. But wow, it's just all in there. If you have someone's Postman workspace with API keys, you probably have the keys to the castle. So it's pretty frightening and surprising this didn't get a lot more attention. If you look at some of the websites that were the businesses whose creds and so on were leaked, wasn't trivial.
Yeah, I mean, there was some really, like hefty stuff in there. They had information from people's Okta IAM services. They had Zendesk access, apparently for a healthcare provider. They had some payment API credentials that were in there. They had both the refresh token and the session secret for a major CRM software that was actually supplied along with the endpoint that was used to generate new access tokens. So that's like the
Which is what's happened. If anyone's used a Postman collection, that's what you do, right? You have the little auth endpoint that you go in, you get your token out, and then you can even write a script so it just appears in the other request automatically, right? What came back on that auth flow. So it's very much what Postman's designed to do. And, when you think about it through the lens, which I wouldn't have thought about, being honest, that like, holy cow, if this stuff ended up in the hands of someone else, how scary that is.
Absolutely. I mean, that alone, that's like the key to the castle right there, and API documentation for a service that was, able to send WhatsApp messages. I mean, all kinds of stuff was in here. But I think that the main thing is to say is that this wasn't a hack, right? This wasn't something that was like breached. This was just people inadvertently exposing stuff without really realizing that they were doing that, and then not following practices that you would expect, or practices that you maybe even would extol to others and say, okay, well, you should really do these things. There's almost this security, I think, that people had a feeling like once they were in their workspace, that their workspace was very safe and very secure. But obviously it was simple enough to set it to public. I mean, the whole list of things here is like the InfoSec nightmare. Misconfigured sharing permissions, inadequate secrets management, not rotating API keys on any kind of a schedule, people obviously not having, the right level of training around what to do here, which is an interesting one because, I know you have, and I certainly have, worked at companies where, they put you through training on security practices on an annual basis, if not more often, to, stay within the lines of compliance. But, I think we can all say that we've, listened to those with the sound off and clicked the next link more often than maybe we should do. And to be honest, a lot of that stuff doesn't even seem to take this kind of thing into account, right? It's like, don't pick up the USB key off the ground, and don't leave your password on a post-it note on your monitor. Cool, but also rotate your secrets and mask your environment variables in Postman doesn't really get mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, there's some nice guides in there, right, about like using secrets management tools. I'm not familiar with Postman enough to know how easy or not that is to sort of take those secrets and put them in somewhere else. One thing I like, obviously, being, doing what we do at Zuplo, they talk about regularly rotating API keys. We do a lot of sort of best practices around API keys for API implementers. And one of the benefits of using Zuplo, if I can drop in a little plug, is that, our self-serve API key feature has built-in rotation so that you can easily rotate your keys, which is a thing a lot of people just don't build when they do build it yourself API key solution. So this, folks, is why you shouldn't do that. Don't build it yourself. Interesting. Surprised it went so under the radar, but yeah. Yeah,
I think that the company that actually did that research on it, I think, had told everybody that was impacted about what it was that was out there and what it is that they needed to change before they even published their report. So I think that there was a timeliness to it that was deliberate as well. But I think that it kind of, it disappeared amongst the holidays quite nicely, which was very lucky for sure. Next thing I wanted to talk about was, of course, it was coming to the end of the year, so everyone's writing their like annual reports about things and putting out pretty infographics for people to play with and look at. And one of the ones that I played with and looked at was the Cloudflare radar report, which was a pretty interesting take on everything that happened on the internet as far as Cloudflare was concerned in 2024. But one of the things that popped up that was interesting was they did a section specifically on API clients and which languages were the most popular as far as traffic that they saw was concerned in 2024. And of the 50% of the traffic that they recorded globally, API clients are making that, right? So that's a huge amount anyway. But of that traffic, the number one language was Go for API clients, which I had to admit I was a little bit surprised by. 12% almost of that whole traffic is coming from Go, which is 2% more than the next best as far as they're concerned, which is Node.js.
And then Python about 10% as well, it looks like. Yeah, I am surprised, but honestly, I guess I'm not now. I've seen it. It's one of those things where when the more I'm in this space, the more I just see people talking about Go now. It seems to, we do a lot of Go at Zuplo as well. It's our sort of preferred non-Node or non-TypeScript language when we're building some of our shared services. I guess it also means, so half of the traffic on they're saying it just over half of traffic on the web is API related.
Yes.
And that would be a split between, and I don't know what the percentage split is, between server to server API comms and like client comms, like my mobile apps are talking to an API. So that's going to be some of that API traffic.
Yep.
But these Go numbers, I don't think you could build like a UI client out of Go, right? So I assume this is mostly server to server stuff. Same with Node. .NET is in there at 4%. That could easily be both, right? That could be .NET clients running on phones, desktops, whatever. Yeah, really interesting. Exciting to see for Go developers. And, for an API-related companies, I think it's just going to keep growing. There's this notion now that SaaS is going to be dead. Satya Nadella talked about this, like the years of SaaS are over with this generative AI boom that's happening, and that the UI is going to become a chat client. But, we have a saying that APIs are how AI gets work done. And so I think the percentage of traffic on the internet that is going to be APIs is just going up, and up.
Yeah, it's interesting as well because towards the end of the year, we did a couple of videos on the channel with Speakeasy and Stainless about their tools for SDK generation. And it was interesting to note that at that point, the majority of people who are coming to them are coming to them for the generation of Node.js SDKs. But they were both on the verge of or had just released Go support for the generation of Go SDKs as well. So obviously something that they knew about in terms of the popularity, the rising popularity of that, and obviously getting more inbound requests from people who were coming to them as a platform asking whether Go was a thing and if they could do it. And at that point it wasn't, but I think by now they have both released the ability to do a Go SDK as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess what this data doesn't tell us is the distribution between the number of clients versus the volume. This just tells us the volume.
Yes.
And it may be that these Go clients are generating a lot more traffic per instance. So maybe Stainless and Speakeasy have the prioritization right, because there's a lot more customers doing JavaScript SDKs. But it just turns out some of the whoppers out there on the internet are Go related. I don't know if it's easy to see that.
And of course, it wouldn't be the API and Anchor if we didn't talk about somebody doing some fundraising, which has been a consistent theme throughout these little chats over the past 3 episodes that we've done. And we're not going to disappoint you because we have another one to discuss as well. And that is that API Deck announced their Series A relatively recently as well, and they have raised themselves a tidy little sum of $7.5 million.
Very nice. So what do API Deck do?
So they are a platform for the unification of APIs in the accounting, HR, and CRM space. So there's a lot of various platforms in there. There are a lot of different platforms that people probably use. you've got a whole bunch of different stuff, especially in CRMs. It's really hard to do, and especially as well for the hiring platforms as well. Like having some kind of singular space, especially for a large company, to pull all that stuff together is it is tricky. You want to be able to push stuff inbound, and you also want to pull stuff outbound. Having a unified platform for this stuff, absolutely makes sense. So they are effectively saying, here's one API on a bunch of services in the accounting, HR, and CRM space. Have fun with it, but they are taking a little shift, as many will, towards also now doing this for LLMs as well. So,
Ooh la la.
yeah, the flavor of the first quarter of 2025, I feel, is how many LLMs can you stick in your service and how quickly can you expose them?
Yeah. I'm sure it helped with the fundraising, where it's like, we are now an AI company. No, that sounds skeptical. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, obviously what we're seeing in the API management space is a lot of API management products adding AI gateways as well. And one of the things those AI gateways do is what I think of as sort of like protocol abstraction, where you have one unified API, and then just by switching a toggle or whatever, or a config, it's talking to Anthropic or it's talking to OpenAPI. So you implement once and get that, which is very API deck-ish, right? That's what they're talking about.
Absolutely.
But they're doing it in a much more sort of centralized service. One of the nice things about AI gateways is obviously they can benefit from the other features that API gateways offer, like rate limiting and key translation, so that you don't have to give the actual API keys to the service to you don't have to give your OpenAI API key to all your developers. Think about the Postman hack. That's one of the reasons that's useful. But also then you can sort of manage the usage as a leader at an organization. You can manage the usage of that much more effectively. It's really interesting to see. There's the major API management players are doing this. There's some companies doing this as their primary offering, like Portkey.ai, for example, and Helicon. And not doing API management stuff. And then now you've got API Deck coming into this space from a slightly different angle as well. It's going to be fascinating to see how this unfolds. From what I hear, the adoption is quite strong at the moment. The thing that needs to be seen over time, though, with all this AI stuff is like, what's the churn? What's the retention? But the need seems very real right now.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see whether they approach this just as a way of dealing with the top level APIs for LLMs, which is what I imagine it'll probably be, or whether they're going to be looking into actually doing this unification around the use of tools inside of LLMs, right? So is it about just being able to access, a selection of different LLMs via a unified API, or is it going the other way and providing LLMs the ability to, use tools via one of their unified LLMs or unified APIs, or both? The options are there, because it's the use of tools is still not popping off as much at the moment, even though there is some unification, or at least close unification in terms of how tools are designed for LLMs and how you call them and what it is that you actually pass to them. OpenAI defined their way of doing it, and actually a lot of the major LLM providers have just done it exactly the same way. So there isn't a massive divergence in how you do that. And if that's the approach, then I don't really know whether there is much of a need for a unified API here. But my guess is that their approach is going to be, here's the top level APIs for a bunch of different LLMs, and you can now use it via one unified interface, which would be the easier way to go, because tools are hard, and getting them to talk to multiple different platforms in a way that makes sense and pass data between them is no small feat.
100%. Yep, interesting. Congratulations to the folks at API Deck.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that brings us to the end of another brief sojourn to the API and Anchor to sit down and have a chat about all things APIs. If there is something that you've seen that you'd like us to talk about, please feel free to drop a little comment below. And if you found the video useful, if you enjoyed it at all, then feel free to drop a like. And if there's something here that you think other people need to see, please do consider sharing the video, and we'll be back here in 2 weeks' time with yet more toings and froings from the world of APIs. Josh, thanks very much.
Cheers, mate. Cheers. My pink Zuplo honoured drink. We got to get those tankards. We say this every time. I heard on a friend's podcast, Code to Market by Gonto and Hank, that if you get to 13 episodes, you're not going to quit. That you're going to keep going. So if we get to 13 episodes of the API and Anchor, which we will, right?
Yeah.
Then we'll get celebratory tankards for episode 14, because then we're not going to quit, so it's not a waste of money.
Fine. Done deal. I'll make a note of it. We'll make sure that when we get to that point in 26 weeks' time-ish, that we're ready with those tankards. They are a beautiful thing. Thanks very much for joining me again, Josh. Thank you for watching, and we'll let Josh carry on with what looks like his very large glass of E-numbers.
To E-numbers and go.